expressing his enthusiasm to be there. And you'll notice that everybody else, well, you can't see it in the crowd, but the crowd behind him all had red hats on, right? That's the color of MAGA, right? The red, make America great again, right? Anybody have a hat like that? I don't actually, but you, okay, so you should, that's cool. So when Elon Musk stood up that night and he donned the hat, the dark hat, he said, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA. That's what he said. I'm going to play it to you right now.
Elon Musk!
Now they're all going to change.
I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark, gothic MAGA. Well, the energy in this room is incredible. All government spending is taxation. So whether it's direct taxation or all government spending, it either becomes inflation or it's direct taxation. Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that. America's just not just going to be great. America is going to reach heights that it has never seen before. The future is going to be amazing! You guys are awesome. Honestly, this is like...
Yeah. Okay, enough with that. That came from the Times, Sunday Times. Go figure. And so the question we have to ask, what the heck is dark MAGA? There's a philosophy behind it. I had to do a deep dive to find out what it was. But it's not what we bargained for in the first place, for sure. Because our expectations were to make America great again, not to make it into dark MAGA. There's another otherworldly philosophy that's competing for our philosophy of limited government, okay? You can't make this stuff up. It's incredible that everybody gave this guy a pass, or all of them, more than Musk in there. But when we see what this philosophy came from in the first place, a guy by the name of Curtis Yarvin. He's the philosopher's wannabe philosopher. He's not a very good one, but he thinks he's hot stuff. And he's a tech bro himself. He was a startup guy in Silicon Valley, partially funded by Peter Thiel. And so he's made some money along the way, like so many of these people have. And so he's not a billionaire at this point, but he's on his way probably. So he fashions himself as an alternative philosopher for technocracy in the modern context. He's a technocrat himself, by the way. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos where his philosophy is being described by other people, not me. Okay, I'm going to lay it off a little bit on them. And you'll get the idea. Here's one lady that's talking about it. This is Curtis Yarvin right here. And let me say, I'm not going to play a video with Kurt Yarvin himself. I listened to this guy extensively on several videos, and he sounds like a guy who had too many LSD trips. He's long hair. I don't cut anybody's any slack if you want long hair, that's fine, no problem with it. But this guy really kind of talks that way, like something's not quite right in his mind. I don't know what it is. But nevertheless, listen to what this woman says about Yarvin and his philosophy. Okay, just let it sink in. Here you go.
This guy wants to turn the US into a tech monarchy, and J.D. Vance has praised his ideas.
If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator-phobia.
His name is Curtis Yarvin, and he's a software engineer and blogger who argues American democracy is so broken it needs to be replaced with monarchy styled after a Silicon Valley tech startup. J.D. Vance has talked about Yarvin and his ideas multiple times, suggesting his theories have shaped his thinking. In his book, Patchwork, A Political System for the 21st Century, Yarvin wrote, "As the crappy governments we inherited from history are smashed, they should be replaced by a global spiderweb of tens, even hundreds of thousands of sovereign, independent mini-countries, each governed by its own joint stock corporation without regard to the residents' opinions." He also believes these corporate countries should have a surveillance system that might as well be out of a dystopian sci-fi. This guy's even proposed converting non-productive people into biodiesel. He later said it was a joke and that he'd find a more humane alternative to genocide, like imprisoning them in virtual realities. But Yarvin sees Trump as a way to get closer to the monarchy he envisions. He told Politico that the Trump admin challenging Congress's constitutionally granted power to control funding is the first step. That's because he feels that Congress, the branch with hundreds of representatives, has too much power that should instead be concentrated in one person. Exactly what our founders were trying to avoid. And that's what conservatives believe too. Project 2025 is filled with language about expanding presidential power. Yarvin, Project 2025, and Trump advocate for the mass firings of civil servants to replace them with loyalists willing to carry out the president's agenda only. Progressive solution to fix Congress would be to end the corporate influence that ensures they represent corporations over the people that voted for them. But MAGA's solution is to create a terrifying corporate authoritarianism so they don't represent the people at all.
Okay, that was a little fast, I realized, but you get the idea a little bit that when Yarvin talks about his philosophy, dark enlightenment, that's dark MAGA. That's how it was expressed by Elon Musk wearing his hat. Dark MAGA is not regular MAGA that we wanted in the first place when we voted for Trump. Now, I'm going to clarify, I voted for Trump, okay? I'm not against him in that sense because I voted for him. On the other hand, this is all about technocracy taking over our government, and forget Trump for now. This is not about Trump anymore. It's about people like Curtis Yarvin, who's implemented or fed this philosophy to the entire tech world in Silicon Valley. These people are eating out of his hand at this point. It's incredible. So let me give you another video.
This guy wants to turn the US into
Nope, not that one, this one. Oh, let's see.
This is worse than Project 2025. If you haven't looked into the neo-reactionary movement, the Dark Enlightenment movement, or the Butterfly movement, it is well past time to do so. These movements were all spearheaded by a man named Curtis Yarvin. The philosophy argues that democracy inherently leads to social decline because of the development of deep state bureaucracies that are unable to maintain control, and that society should be run like corporations with a CEO in charge. As Yarvin has said, if Americans want to change their government, they need to get rid of their dictator phobia. One way of dealing with that is to hire two executives and make sure that they work together and that there really is no other solution. His words. Yarvin's ideas have become popular with Silicon Valley power brokers, and some whistleblowers recently came out against Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk, claiming that they follow these ideals and see the government as something to be overhauled for their specific gain. J.D. Vance, the vice president, is a longtime Curtis Yarvin admirer. Peter Thiel, who is Musk's closest friend in the tech world, has been bankrolling these ideas for years. And now, Musk has turned his full attention to under the guise of Doge. Elon Musk, step by step, is executing a version of Yarvin's butterfly revolution, his outline for seizing control of government infrastructure without ever staging an actual coup, at least not like how we know it to be. His stance is why struggle with the inefficiencies of a slow-moving bureaucracy when you could just simply replace it with a streamlined rule by a single executive or CEO. Doge is an experiment in government capture. It is a vehicle for consolidating power, bypassing Congress, and hollowing out things that make democracy function. We are seeing it happen now. It follows Yarvin's playbook to the T. It is treating the government as an outdated operating system and is replacing accountability with hierarchy and prioritizing absolute loyalty over the law. Yarvin wanted a world where a CEO could run the country like it was a company that benefited the rich and the ultra-wealthy, and Elon Musk is helping to make that a reality. This is so much worse than Project 2025 ever could have been, And it's happening so fast that no one seems to know how to fight back against what is a coup of the U.S. government under the guise of draining the swamp and showcasing corruption. That's what they want you to think that it is, that they are just draining the swamp, that they are finding out where your tax dollars go. That's what they want you to think. But look into these movements that I have talked about here. I did a deep dive on it, and it shook me to my core. It is disgusting, and it is insane that this is the things that we have to worry about. In 2025, we have to worry about this kind of stuff. I mean, and Elon Musk is granddad. He did something very similar, or wanted to do something very similar in Canada, until he was stopped by the government, and they put him on a watch list. And then he moved to South Africa to benefit from the apartheid that was happening down there. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, you guys. Open your eyes. It's so much bigger than I could have imagined. It's so much bigger than anybody could have imagined. We all thought that Project 2025 was what we really had to worry about. But there's not going to even be democracy as we know it if this continues the way that it is going. If we continue down the path that we are moving down, there won't even be democracy anymore. It will be like a corporation. That's what they want. J.D. Vance quotes Yarvin in speeches. I've seen it for myself. It is real. J.D. Vance randomly shows up on the scene. Why? Where did he come from? He hated Trump at one point, and now he's the vice president. Use your brain. It's bigger than any of them. It's a movement. It's bigger than all of them combined. They are just doing it for themselves.
Amen. Well, okay, that's pretty sobering, actually. I'm going to give you just one more video, and I'm going to skip through it here because there was a book released in 2017 called Technocracy in America. This book was written by the guy I mentioned in an earlier presentation. His name is Dr. Parag. He's from Asia, and he's currently stationed as a political science professor at the U School for Foreign Policy, I think it is called, in Singapore. So this guy speaks with authority. When he wrote this book, actually this book was published on my birthday in 2017. I took that as a birthday present from the Lord. I really did, because this guy is off his rocker too. But this is 10 years before this stuff with Curtis Yarvin's, okay? The case he made in this book, I'm going to show you a little clip, his trailer that he made on it. The stuff he says in this book in writing, and by the way, I thought it was a very pedestrian book. It has typos in it. It was not the quality that he normally writes with, but nevertheless, this critique is that America's broken, can't be recovered, and needs to adopt a style of government more like China, with a committee of presidents. This is crazy stuff for us anyway. That's crazy. This is not constitutional at all. But nevertheless, you're going to listen to his trailer. The one, well, he didn't make it. I'm sure he had somebody, a tech person, made this professional trailer. But when you see this guy, this is his picture when at that time, 10 years, now he has a little bit of gray hair. Handsome guy, articulate as can be. The global elite love this guy, and he took a shot at America. How dare he? In one hand, how dare he tell us what's wrong with us? We'll figure that out ourselves. We don't need somebody like him, a globalist, telling us what's wrong with America. Nevertheless, just listen to the language in his video here, just a few minutes, and get out of here. Here we go. This was just as Trump was being elected last time, and let's see if I can get it playing here. Just let your eyeballs and your ears just Feastus. Come on. Oh, shoot. Gosh. Okay. There we go. You don't get it this time. There. Do some fact checking here yourself, for sure. Direct technocracy. Okay, now I'm going to go back up to the slide here where he talks about all the things he's going to do. He wants to abolish the electoral college, number one. He wants to recreate the cabinet into functional experts. He wants to abolish the Senate, replace it with Assembly of Governors, let the Supreme Court modify the Constitution exclusively, abolish the office of a single president and elect a committee of 7 co-presidents. And this was off the wall, in my opinion, at that time. But you see, the critique is America is broken. This is what all this Yarvin people are saying. America is so broken that it can't go back to a democracy anymore. So this all needs to pause for a while we are run by essentially a CEO. Yarvin actually says with his own lips, we need a monarchy in America, a monarchy. You know what a monarchy is? It's like King Charles, right? I don't think we want, didn't we get rid of that over, what, 76, right? We dealt with that somewhere along the way. We don't want a monarch. Yet this is exactly what these people are saying. We have to have a monarchy now to straighten everything out, to get everything running just so, and maybe we'll revert back later, but you know that's not going to happen because they're going to be fat, dumb, and happy with all of their money and all of their assets and everything else in the country. So having said that, I don't want to talk about Trump because this is bigger than Trump. It really is at this point. It's beyond politics at this point. These people have an agenda to turn America inside out from the inside. It's incredible. I say no, not just no, heck no. No way they can get away with this. But they're doing it right now. So Elon Musk has a free pass now to collect all the data that he can get his hands on from our government, stuff it into AI programs in the cloud, analyze it, figure out what's going on, and turn it around and control the people from which it was collected in the first place. There's no end to this at this point. The genie is out of the bottle because the government, the federal government, has been opened up data-wise like a can of sardines at this point. You can't put them back again. Once the data escapes to AI, it's done. The training is being done even as we speak with all of our data, sensitive data. Incredible. So having said that, what's the object of this whole thing? Well, the first, and I think probably only objective, near-term objective, is to replace government functioning with AI. Now, that's really the big thing at this point that's playing out, I think. The more they can get it swept in, the more it will tend to stay forever. Congress doesn't have a clue about this. Unfortunately, Trump undid an order, an executive order that Biden put in, believe it or not. I hated the thing when I saw it, but now it at least put some guardrails on AI a little bit to rein these people in a little bit. That's all been done away with now. Essentially, AI is running on its own speed right now, and there's no guardrails at all. They want there no regulation at all. They said basically, we'll decide what's right for us, making this technology go forward. So, okay, where does this leave us at this point? Well, obviously, not many people understand what's going on here, because when Musk said, well, I'm dark MAGA, the people cheered. Didn't have a clue what he was saying. You know what he's saying now. I've done a deep dive on this, and I don't like what I saw. I don't like it at all. I even hate to think that I have to say it to you to explain it this way, but this guy is running off with basically what's left of our sovereignty at this point. It's crazy stuff. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to talk, and I'm just going to shut my, done. There you go. I'm done with this right now. Tomorrow morning, I want to explain about how we as Christians can deal with this. Because at this point, this certainly is not about political, blowback necessarily. But we as Christians are faced with a new opportunity to interface with this coming world that they're creating for us right now. How are you and I going to interface with this world? How are we going to be ambassadors to this world? Which that's clearly our New Testament exhortation, right? Paul said, I'm an ambassador for Christ. I'm an ambassador in chains for Christ. That meant he would do anything Christ sent him in the world to do, to be an ambassador, to take the message of the kingdom to the kingdom of the world. Yet there's one other function that ambassador invariably will say, that's what they're charged with. When you encounter your citizens from your country in that country, and they're in trouble, it doesn't matter what it is, when they find themselves in trouble with some situation, maybe moral crisis, doesn't matter, you're supposed to be the one that can give them shelter from that storm. That's what an ambassador does. That's what an embassy does. When things go really wrong in a country, that our embassy fills up all of a sudden with people seeking refuge. We should be a refuge to the world at this point. I'm just saying. This means life is going to change for a lot of people, especially Christians, I think. We have to face it, wherever God wants to take us at this point. Who knows? Maybe it's going to be just normal for some of you, maybe not for others. My life, I expect, I don't know where it's going actually, but we have to face the fact that the Lord wants to use us individually to reach out to the people in the world to explain what is going on in Dodge City. Things are really going off to the rails right now. So that's it. Be of good courage. Do not be fearing what's going on. God's bigger than that. You know He is, right? This is serious business. I realize that. But God understands everything, and wherever He planted us in the first place, He expects us, once we have the information in our head, He expects us to bloom where we are, and He expects us to interface with other people and be the salt and light they need at this point, desperately need, because they're going to be thrown under the bus nilly-willy in the future. You may be the last person that somebody meets who can bail them out. We'll look tomorrow at Jude, especially, snatching them out of the fire even with their smoking clothes on. This is a picture of rescue, search and rescue for us, I think, in the future. We need to be prepared for it. So in any case, that's all I have to say. Thank you, guys.
Control, let's jump in there and do it. And then the other one's what's in the Lord's hands. You know, Joseph was a godly man, concentrates power into the hands of the Pharaoh. He concentrated power. And what did he do? What did that Pharaoh do with the concentrated power? Well, that particular Pharaoh used it for good, fed the children of Israel, gave them the best land of Goshen, and then gave them jobs taking care of his cattle. But later there was a new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph. And he used all that concentrated power to oppress the children of Israel, make them slaves, and even throw their sons in the Nile River. So God is the one that put Joseph in there, right? So we have to say, okay, we're living our lives and we're using our freedoms to spread the gospel. But on the other hand, God is still working his global plan, and the book of Revelation is going to take place, and so he's setting things up. So we have our lives inside of the big picture of what God's doing. And so I'm going to give a little zoom in on one of those pieces of history, and it's the fall of the Ottoman Empire, right? And so in the late 1800s, it was called the sick man of Europe. It had been around since 1071 when the Muslims first invaded the Byzantine Empire. Mark Twain goes over there and he sees Jerusalem. You've probably seen this. Palestine is desolate, unlovely, rags, wretchedness, poverty, dirt, signs and symbols that indicate presence of Muslim rule, the Ottoman Empire. Jerusalem is mournful, dreary, lifeless. I would not desire to live there. Muslims watch the Golden Gate with a jealous eye, anxious one, for they have the honor tradition that when it falls, Islamism will fall in the Ottoman Empire. He says, Jerusalem, anyway, it's all messed up. So the Ottoman Empire is being encroached upon, be it by Russia in the north, by France taking over Libya, and you have Egypt, Britain taking over Egypt, and so forth. And you see 1914, right before World War I. The green is what's left of the Ottoman Empire, but then you see the Russians have a zone, and the British have a zone, and then the French, and then later Italy wants to take over Ethiopia. And so the sick man of Europe, Abdul Hamid II, he's got his, multiple wives and concubines, and a little group of people called Armenians want to break away from the Ottoman Empire. Lots of people are breaking away. They want to break away too, and the Sultan says no, and he kills 100,000 of them, and lots of them came to America. And so the Ottoman Empire would have collapsed on its own had it not been for something called oil. So in the 1800s, where did oil come from? Whales. And they chased these poor things around the world, caught them, and boiled their blubber down and would put it in these whale oil lamps. And they were almost going extinct until 1849. Oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, Drake Oil Well, 1859. And then it was discovered in Oklahoma, and then it was discovered in Iraq. And guess what? Winston Churchill changed the British Navy from coal to oil. And Britain doesn't have any oil. They have one oil well in Sherwood Forest, right? And so the British form the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You know it better as BP. So Iran, Persia, is teamed up with Britain, but Germany needs oil. So they're taking down the sign, Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, and putting up the sign British Petroleum. And so Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany is industrializing. There's no oil wells in Germany, and so he makes a deal with Sultan Abdul Hamid II, the guy with lots of wives. And Kirkuk, Iraq, was actually part of the Ottoman Empire under the Sultan, Berlin-Baghdad Railroad. And there is Abdul Hamid II, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany II. If you saw the movie The Promise with Christian Bale, it goes through this period where the Turks were treating the Armenians nice until the Germans came in and whipped them into a jihad war mode, and then they killed the Armenians. So half of World War I took place in the Middle East. And you had them using poison gas and all the rest of it. And during this time, Woodrow Wilson wants America to recognize Armenia as an independent country, and the League of Nations is being formed, but it would require the U.S. to surrender our sovereignty to the League of Nations, a globalist one-world government group, and we say no, and so poor Armenia gets leaders called the Young Turks, 3 pashas, and they kill 1.5 million Armenians. And so when World War I ends, the map of Europe is redrawn, all right? Germany is all divided up. Well, guess what? The map of the Middle East is redrawn. And you have the Sykes-Picot Treaty, and part of the Ottoman Empire is given to France, which is Syria, Lebanon. Part of it's given to the British, and then part of it's a little bit to Russia, and then a part of it to Italy. Well, during this time, you have Hyman Weizmann. He's a Jewish chemist from Russia. Remember Fiddler on the Roof? Jews fled from Russia. Well, he goes to Britain, and he's a chemist. And the Germans need explosives. They're running out. You're fighting a war, you need explosives. Well, he finds a bacterial fermentation process to make acetone, which is necessary to make explosives. So they're turned breweries into making this acetone. And after the war, they're thankful, and they want to make him a sir or a knight. And he says, no, I'd really like a homeland for the Jewish people. And he says, they tell him, what about Uganda? The British control Uganda. He goes, no, I was thinking of the traditional area. They go, oh, yeah. And so they issue the Balfour Declaration. There's Lord Balfour, and he talks about giving the Jews their chance. But where did the Jews get the idea of going back to their traditional land? Well, Jeffrey Alderman, Jewish Chronicle, writes, the Balfour Declaration was born out of religious sentiment. Arthur Balfour, British Foreign Secretary, was a Christian mystic, that's this Jewish author's term for that, who believed that the Almighty had chosen him to be an instrument of the divine will, the purpose of which was to restore Jews to their ancient homeland, perhaps as a precursor to the second coming of the Messiah. So this is a Jewish book saying they got their idea from, and then the declaration was intended to assist in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. This appealed to Lloyd George, British Prime Minister, believing in the prophecies of the Bible, which he knew in and out. And then, so you have the Christians planting the seed for the Zionist movement. Here's, so after you have the Great Awakening revival, the Revolutionary War, and then you have the Second Great Awakening revival. And you have people called millennialists. These are people that finally figured out that Jesus is going to come back and rule and reign for 1,000 years. The question was when. There was even a group called the Millerites that picked the date, 1844, and they had this sweep across America, this frenzy, Jesus is going to come back. Well, he didn't come back, and so after that was the great disappointment. And lots of people fell away from the faith, sort of like 88 Reasons He's come back in 1988. Anyway, so these millennialists were telling the Jews, you need to think about going back to the traditional Jewish homeland for these prophecies to be fulfilled. Here is Anita Shapira, writes Israel a History. The idea of Jews returning to their ancient homeland as the first step to world redemption seems to have originated among a specific group of evangelical English Protestants that flourished in England in the 1840s. They passed this notion onto Jewish circles. Lo and behold, the reason that Christians that are true Christians feel a heart for Israel is because we helped them come into existence in the modern era by planting the seed there. And so Theodor Herzl, he's a Jew that helps organize the first Zionist Congress, 1897. And one of the people that attended was a Christian named Henry Dunant, and he was the YMCA director in Geneva, Switzerland, and he formed the International Red Cross, and he's the first recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. And Lord Balfour tells a Jewish gathering in 1918, my personal hope is that the Jews will make good in Palestine and eventually found a Jewish state. It's up to them now. We've given them the great opportunity. And just this was last year's activist slashed the painting of Arthur Balfour in England. So this is the land. This is part of the old Ottoman Empire, right? For nearly like 700 years, it was the Ottoman Empire. And so France gets the Syria and Lebanon and so forth. But the British Mandate, they give the area to the Jews that was the same area that God promised Moses. the same area that David had expanded Israel's border to the Mediterranean, over to Iraq and Syria, down to Arabia and Egypt. And then a monkey wrench was thrown in. Lawrence of Arabia, he's a British lieutenant. He was sent on a reconnaissance assignment to see if Arab Muslims would join the British to fight Turkish Muslims. And so he goes to the Sharif of Mecca, who viewed himself as a moderate because you would have Muslims coming on their Hajj pilgrimage, and they would be coming from Indonesia and Pakistan all around, and he was like, okay, everybody's a little bit different, let's all get along. So he was considered a modernist. Lieutenant T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, he took it upon himself to promise the Arabs, if they would help the British defeat the Turks, they would get all the land in the Middle East. And so he even admitted he lied. He writes in 7 Pillars of Wisdom, 1922, had I been an honest advisor to the Arabs, I would have advised them to go home and not risk their lives fighting for such stuff. I risked the fraud on my conviction that Arab help was necessary to our cheap and speedy victory in the East, and better that we win and break our word than lose. For being a successful trickster, and to prevent this unpleasantness arising, I began in my reports to conceal the true stories of things. He began lying to the British, lying to the Arabs. He was promising, you're going to get all the land. And then he'd go back to the British and say, oh, they just want to help. They don't want anything. And so the land is divided up after World War I. And the Sharif of Mecca, the guy that was promised that he would get all this land, it was unauthorized. And his name was Hussein ibn Ali al-Hashimi. And for his part, he was fairly moderate. Lawrence of Arabia called him a modernist because he was wanting to have everybody get along inside of Islam, but then he also wanted to get along with the people outside of Islam. During the Armenian genocide, remember I told you about the Armenians being killed? The Sharif of Mecca sent a message to the Muslims in Syria saying, protect and take good care of everyone of the Jacobite Armenian community living in your territories, and defend them as you would defend yourselves. They are the protected people of the Muslims. And so the British say, okay, we'll take you up on Lawrence of Arabia's promise. We'll take a part of the old Ottoman Empire, we'll carve out a country, and we'll name it Iraq, and we'll take the Sharif of Mecca's son, Fazl, and we'll make him king of Iraq. And Lawrence of Arabia, the movie, Alec Guinness played Fazl. And you know Alec Guinness because he was also Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars. And so here's a picture of Fazl of Iraq with Chaim Weizmann, the Jew that developed acetone that helped the British to win, right? And then Fazl is at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, and he says, we feel that the Arabs and Jews are cousins in having suffered similar oppression at the hands of power stronger than themselves. We look with the deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We will wish the Jews a most hearty welcome home. Well, the Sharif of Mecca even says, the resources of the country are still virgin soil and will be developed by the Jewish immigrants. That the country is, for its original sons, notice he calls it the original sons, for all their differences, a sacred and beloved homeland. And by the way, the Sharif of Mecca is buried on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, in a crypt. And anyway, there's a book, it's in Ezekiel somewhere, but the line says that, the temple's defiled with the heathen graves next to it. It's like, where are the heathen graves? Well, the Sharif of Mecca's graves up there. So this is the British mandate. This is all the land that the British had given there. And then King Fazl thought that he was going to get all of Iraq and Syria because of this unauthorized promise of Lawrence of Arabia. And so the French come into Syria, drive out Fazl, and there's tension. And then war almost breaks out, and Fazl has a brother named Abdullah that wants to start a war with France. Now, in the middle of all this, some of the people that were driven out by the French, it was a guy named Amin al-Husseini, and he became the Mufti of Jerusalem, and he's the uncle of Yasser Arafat. So the British have this whole land they gave to the Jews, and Winston Churchill is trying to avert a war with France. And so the story is that he is at lunch with a napkin and a pen, and he draws out a map, and he takes 2/3 of the land that was given to the Jews, and he creates another brand new country called Transjordan, or Jordan, across the Jordan River, and he gives it to Abdullah, the brother of Fazl. So now we have the Sharif of Mecca has one son that's the king of Iraq, another son that's the king of Jordan. And there is Abdullah with Winston Churchill, and now the map actually has a little jerk in there. Let's see that little jerk, and everybody's like, why in the world did he draw this little jerk? There was no reason for it. And so it's called Churchill's Hiccup. Churchill, known for drinking with his meals a little brandy, explained in 1921 how he drew the map of the Middle East on a napkin at lunch with one stroke of a pen one Sunday afternoon in Cairo. Years later, Churchill addressed the House of Commons, March 24th, 1936. The Emir Abdullah is in Transjordania, where I put him one Sunday afternoon at Jerusalem. All right, so he's admitted. And there's the Winston Churchill's hiccup. So there's Churchill and Abdullah. And so you got Fazl, he's the Sharif of Mecca that worked with Lawrence of Arabia that got that unauthorized promise. His son, Sharif of Mecca, so his son Fazl, and then the son Abdullah. And Abdullah, for his part, was moderate to the Jews. And he writes, as Arabs see the Jews, he goes, no people on earth have been less anti-Semitic than the Arabs. The persecution of the Jews has been confined almost entirely to Christian nations of the West. Jews themselves will admit that never since the Great Dispersion, right, after, Nero and they dispersed the Jews, did Jews develop so freely and reach such importance as in Spain, when it was an Arab possession. With very minor exceptions, Jews have lived for many centuries in the Middle East in complete peace and friendliness with their Arab neighbors. And so now Greece wants a little bit of the land, and Armenia wants a little bit of the land, but the Kurds want a little bit of the old Ottoman Empire. But Ataturk of Turkey rallies the Turks, and they at least keep Turkey, right? They almost lost that. But Ataturk was a modernist. And he was the Ataturk. Ata means father, right? So he's the father of modern-day Turkey. So here's Ataturk with King Fazl. And here's another picture of Ataturk with King Fazl. Notice their dress. They're dressed in British Western clothes. And then there's Ataturk with Reza Shah Pahlavi of Iran. And he's saying, hey, we got to be more tolerant. You got to let women hold office, and you got to let women get educated, and you got to get rid of the burqas. And Ataturk outlawed the beards. He outlawed fezzes and burqas in Turkey. He outlawed the Arabic language in Turkey. And he made the Saturday and Sunday the holy day instead of Friday because he wanted to be more European. And so here he is with the leader of Afghanistan telling him, hey, you need to let women have equality. And Ataturk said, he is a weak ruler who needs religion to uphold his government. Even before accepting the religion of the Arabs, the Turks were a great nation. Mohammedanism was based on Arab nationalism above all nationalities. The purpose of the religion founded by Muhammad over all nations was to drag them into including Arab national politics. It might have suited tribes in the desert. It is no good for a modern, progressive state. And John F. Kennedy even praised Ataturk. I'm honored to join the commemorating the 25th anniversary of the death of Kemal Ataturk. Turkey grew out of a collapsing empire. And so now you have the Shah of Iran. And he is moderate. There he is with Eisenhower. There he is with Truman. There he is with Kennedy. And then him and his wife with Jacqueline. And then Iran in 1960s and 70s, I show these pictures already today. Iran is more left Western leaning, and there's Afghanistan and Syria and Gamal Nasser. He was not a friend of Israel, but he was more tolerant when it came to not enforcing radical Islam. Matter of fact, in 1958, Nasser said, I met with the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was started in 1928, and he says, and he sat with me, and he made his request. What did he request? To make wearing the hijab mandatory in Egypt and demand every woman walking the streets wear a tarha. I told him my opinion is every person in his own house decides for himself the rules. And he replied, no, as the leader, you are responsible. I told him, sir, you have a daughter in the School of Medicine. She's not wearing a tarha. If you're unable to make one girl who's your daughter wear a tarha, you want me to put a tarha on 10 million women myself? And then everybody laughs. What happened? Again, how do we go from the West, the Middle East, moving more westward to what we have today? And you remember the Sharif of Mecca, who worked with Lawrence of Arabia, whose one son's king of Iraq, other son's king of Jordan. The British wanted to twist his arm to make a treaty. And the British were known, like, remember Lawrence of Arabia said, better we win and break our word? The British were known for that. The British promised the Kurds, if they were to help the British defeat the Turks, they would get their own land. Did they? No. And so when the Sharif of Mecca balked on a pressured treaty with Britain, Britain said, you know what? We're just going to stand back and let your political enemy, Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, take over Arabia. And the problem was that Abdul Aziz ibn Saud was a Wahhabi. And so he takes over Arabia in 1924, and the Sharif of Mecca is exiled to Cyprus. And then he dies, and he's buried on the Temple Mount. And Lawrence of Arabia describes the Wahhabis. He says the Wahhabis, followers of a fanatical Muslim heresy, had imposed their strict rules. Everything was forcibly pious, forcibly puritanical. William McCants writes, Saudis promote a very toxic form of Islam that draws sharp lines between a small number of true believers and everyone else, Muslim and non-Muslim. Wahhabis are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill a non-Muslim. Winston Churchill says, individual Muslims may show splendid qualities, but the influence of the religion paralyzes social development of those who follow it. No stronger retrograde force exists in the world. And here's Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, 1955. Islamic law offers this American lawyer a study in dramatic contrast. The law of the Middle East is the antithesis of Western law. He's talking about this Wahhabism. And so we love the person, we just don't like the Wahhabi radical teaching. And so Abdul Aziz ibn Saud has 45 wives, or many wives, 45 sons, and he takes over Mecca. Now, why is this important? Remember, the Sharif of Mecca was more tolerant, Muslims coming from around the world. Well, now that the Saud family with Wahhabism controls Mecca, Muslims on their pyramid come to Mecca and get infected with Wahhabism and then go back to all their corners of the world. But the big change came with oil being discovered in Saudi Arabia in 1938 by John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. And just within a short, now Rockefeller was a globalist, richest man in the world. He controlled all kinds of stuff. His family donated the land that the United Nations building is built on. And so within just a generation of oil being discovered, Saudi Arabia goes from the poorest to the richest country in the Middle East. And these other countries, they're saying, well, why should we be more westernized to be blessed? Look at Saudi Arabia. They're more fundamental, and look how blessed they are. So Saudi Arabia, Wahhabism became a magnet for fundamentalism. And they began to use their money to buy Western politicians. And so you have, I talked to Rick Perry one time, the former governor of Texas, and he says that he was stationed over there in the Air Force, and they were like driving in their desert, and they didn't know which side of the road to go on, and he said they were like, but we were, now look at Saudi Arabia, how rich it is. I mean, it's unbelievable amount of wealth. And so the 2 points are that Wahhabism gave birth to all the violent Muslim groups. The Wahhabism is the teaching that infected the Muslim Brotherhood, PLO, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, Boko Haram, all goes back to Wahhabi. But then the Saudi oil is financing all this. And they even did a sort of a blackmail thing. These fundamentalist groups says we won't try to overthrow the king of Saudi Arabia as long as he's funding all of these groups. And so now Palestine. The name Palestine goes back to King Herod, 135, King Hadrian, the Roman Emperor Hadrian. So King Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian, I'm trying to get a lot in a short amount of time. They have the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Romans send a legion over, 135 AD, and the Simon Bar Kokhba gets like 400,000 Jews, and they wipe out an entire Roman legion. And then Emperor Hadrian sends over another legion, wiped out, erased from history, gone. Nobody knows what happened to it, just disappeared. And so Hadrian decides he's going to send every Roman legion to the land of Judea and wipe it out. And he kills millions of Jews. And he builds a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount. He renames the city after his family name, Aeolia, and he tracks down and tries to kill every descendant of David. And then he takes the map and he wipes off the name Judea and he puts in Syria, Palestina. He's like, I'm done with that. I'm just going to wipe out this people. And that's where the land gets called Palestina or Palestine. But it was always known as the homeland of the Jews. Here's an organization in 1925 called the United Palestine Appeal. Help the wanderer back to his soil. And it's Rabbi Stephen Wise is the head of it. And Franklin Roosevelt writes him a letter, Dear Dr. Wise, please convey my good wishes to the National Conference for Palestine, which has been summoned by the United Palestine Appeal. The American people have watched with sympathetic interest the effort of the Jews to renew in Palestine the ties to their ancient homeland, and reestablish Jewish culture in the place where for centuries it flourished, and so forth. And then the British reneged on the Balfour Declaration on the British Mandate. And instead of letting the Jews go back to the Holy Land in 1922, the British, to try to appease the fundamentalist Muslims, issue the white papers and say no more Jews can go back there. And so you have the movie Exodus with Paul Newman. Dun, 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 dun. It's a good movie. And it tracks how the British tried to stop the Jews from going back. And but in 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood is formed, 6 members of the Suez Canal Company. Suez Canal was built by the French, taken over by the British in 1888, and it was British controlled up until Gamal Nasser took control. So the Muslim Brotherhood has their strategy of infiltration. Pretend like you're a moderate Muslim, go into countries, and then assassinate leaders. And so you throw into this the Mufti of Jerusalem. He was the one who fled from Syria to Jerusalem when the French took over, and now that he's in Jerusalem, he is in charge, he's the Mufti, he hates the Jews, and when Hitler starts World War II, the Mufti of Jerusalem aligns with Hitler. And he says, you hate Jews, we hate Jews, and so he even raised a Bosnian Panzer Division of Muslims to fight alongside of the Nazis to kill the Jews. And Roosevelt, in one of the blackest crimes of all history, begun Nazis' wholesale systematic murder of Jews. Jews are threatened with annihilation. And so after the war, the Jews are going to the Holy Land. And FDR goes to the Yalta Conference with Stalin and Churchill, and he basically gives half of Europe to the communists. Thanks a lot, FDR. Well, on his way back, he stops off in the Suez Canal, USS Quincy, and he has lunch with Aziz ibn Saud, who slaughters a goat on deck for barbecuing for their lunch. And he blindsides FDR. FDR was basically saying, hey, can you help the Jews go back? And he's like, Jews are terrible, Jews are terrible, Jews are terrible. And FDR's like, oh, really? I didn't know all this. And so after FDR gets back to America, FDR writes him a letter and says, I assure you that I would take no action in my capacity of chief executive with regard to the question of Palestine. So FDR's like, okay. And then FDR does a secret arms for oil treaty with the king of Saudi Arabia, saying, if you give oil to America, sell oil to America in US dollars, petrodollars, and then America will build a base over there and will defend Saudi Arabia. Well, anyway, so after this letter, within a week, FDR's dead. Truman takes over. Truman served in World War I with a Jewish friend, Eddie Jacobson. And afterwards, they come back to Kansas City and they open a haberdashery, a men's clothing store. And then Truman gets involved in politics, becomes president, and when Israel, you have Britain with the British Mandate, the United Nations is formed. Who helped form it? Harry S. Truman. And as soon as the United Nations is formed, the British says, this is our chance to get rid of this Middle East problem. We are going to give up our British mandate to the United Nations on May 15th, 1948. We're done with this Middle East stuff. And so now the clock's ticking. And no country in the world wants to recognize Israel as a nation. And if they don't recognize it, Jordan's going to take it, right? Abdullah, even though he was nice, they still want to take it. And so Chaim Weizmann, the one that came up with acetone, he is the president, and he goes to meet with Truman. And Truman does not have time for him until the phone rings, and it's Eddie Jacobson. And it's Mr. President Harry, old friend, how are you doing? Say, Chaim Weizmann, he's traveled halfway around the world. Can you just take a few minutes with him? And so Truman says, okay, and meets with him. And Chaim Weizmann says, you have an opportunity to make history, that you can fulfill these promises. And Harry S. Truman was Baptist, and his mom taught him the Bible, and he's like, okay, I'll do it. There was even the U.S. ambassador in Europe was speaking to a crowd and going to tell them that the U.S. was not going to recognize Israel when May 15th, 1948 comes around, but the phone rings. And he takes an excuse away from speaking, goes over, answers the phone, and says, okay. And then he goes back and says, America is going to recognize Israel. So Truman changed it in a moment. So Israel's born, became a nation. And the Democrat platform, 1948, says, President Truman, by granting immediate recognition of Israel, led the world in extending welcome to a people who have long sought freedom. We pledge full recognition of the state of Israel. We affirm the state of Israel's right to self-defense. Well, immediately, the Arab countries attack. And King Abdullah of Jordan seizes Jerusalem and takes control of the Temple Mount. At first, it looks bad, but the other Muslim countries were using that as the rally cry. Let's get rid of the Jews. Let's get back to Temple Mount for Islam. And since the king of Jordan, who's a moderate Muslim, has the Temple Mount, it sort of took away the motivation for the other Muslim countries to say, well, we got to get the Temple Mount back for Islam. Well, Islam already has it with the king of Jordan. They're like, oh, well, okay. So it ended up being what some consider a good thing that he did that. Nevertheless, the person who organized the peace treaty to the 1948 Arab-Israeli conflict was Ralph Bunche, the first African-American to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And so King Abdullah was in Jerusalem at the Al-Aqsa Mosque when he was assassinated by a Palestinian terrorist, right? The Muslim Brotherhood had infiltrated the country of Jordan, and here he is assassinated. So now these Arab leaders who want to be more moderate have to watch their back, because if they get too moderate, they're going to get assassinated. And so they ask Einstein to be the next president of Israel. He says no, and he dies because he's ill, and he dies 3 years later. He says, my relationship with the Jewish people became my strongest human tie. Meanwhile, Turkey, you had Ataturk, was really tolerant, and he dies, and you have radicals taking over Istanbul, and they destroy the Greek Orthodox Christian neighborhoods. It's called a pogrom, and then you have the Cold War. So we always think, okay, Arabs, Jews, and Christians, and we think of it like chess. It's more like Chinese checkers. It's more like at least 3 players at the same time, and you have the Soviets. So after World War II, the countries of Europe were setting up republics and becoming free, and the Soviets didn't like that, so they would go in and do critical theory, identify all the groups, economically, racially, religiously, socially, and then call them victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots, and pit them against each other to have riots and bloodshed, and then co-opt the media to blame the leader so that they could do a coup and nobody would question it. And so the Soviets begin to get involved in the Middle East. So Britain then gives up its protectorate in Egypt. You get a King Farouk, who's a moderate leader of Egypt, but he's a lustful glutton, lots of women. He would eat like hundreds of oysters a day, and he's a weak leader, and his weakness is encouraging the USSR to move to the Middle East. And so the CIA says, we want to topple King Farouk with Project FF in 1952, and that's when Gamal Nasser takes over. And then Iran is beginning to side with the Soviet Union, a leader named Mossadegh. And so Eisenhower and has his Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, and the head of the, John Foster Dulles, and his brother, Allen Dulles, is head of CIA. Allen Dulles does Operation Ajax, where he gets Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, to go to Tehran. He's an expert in foreign languages, and he does that critical race theory in reverse. He recruits mobsters and gangsters and finds out all the groups and begins to organize riots and attack mosques and cause all this, and then co-opt the media to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. And when Mossadegh's popularity falls, they put him under house arrest and replace him with the Shah. And the Shah loved America because we helped put him in. So now we have Egypt. Gamal Nasser almost starts World War III when he takes control of the Suez Canal away from the British. And he does not let American and French and Israeli ships go through, and so everybody's teaming up to go back and get it, and then he says, well, maybe I'll become friends with the Soviets, and then the British and the French back out, and then it's just America, and then and Israel. And so Eisenhower tells, so the Israelis capture the Sinai Peninsula, and they win. But Eisenhower pressures them, says, look, give up the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt, land for peace, it'll all be wonderful. And it was not. Well, you have the the Soviets organized the PLO in Moscow in the 1960s. It's a critical race theory group. And they have Yasser Arafat be the head of it. And so the PLO was organized by the Soviets for one purpose: sow division in the Middle East so the Middle East would not become pro-American. And then the Soviets helped Castro take over Cuba, and they helped Che Guevara start ELN in Bolivia and FARC in Colombia. And anyway, so then we have the 1967 Six-Day War, and the Jews take control of the Temple Mount, and they even put a Jewish flag on top of the Dome of the Rock. But Moshe Dayan says, no, let's give it back to the Arabs and we'll have peace, right? Land for peace. And then you have Nixon meeting with Golda Meir, who was actually raised in Milwaukee as a Jew, and she says this in 1969, there was no such thing as Palestinians. When was there an independent Palestinian people and a Palestinian state? It was either southern Syria, part of the Ottoman Empire, before World War I, and then it was Jordan. It was not as though there was a Palestinian people in Palestine considering itself a Palestinian people, and we came and threw them out and took their country away from them. They did not exist. Right? Never in history was there a Palestinian nation with a Palestinian king. Right? It was 700 years of Ottoman Empire. And then there's Stephen Wise again, and he gives a sermon, Jesus the Jew, and he's saying, look, even though that we're Jews, Jesus was a really good rabbi. He said lots of good things. And then 1972, these fundamentalist Muslims kill a bunch of Jews at the Olympics in Munich. In 1973, they do their Yom Kippur War. And then afterwards, you have Jimmy Carter does a treaty between Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. And Anwar Sadat is praised by Billy Graham, Pat Robertson. He's the leader of Egypt making peace with the Jews. And everybody thinks this is wonderful until the Muslim Brotherhood type people, they infiltrated the Egyptian military, and they're having a parade, and in the middle of the parade, the army stops, these guys turn with their machine guns, and they kill the president of the country, Anwar Sadat. Mubarak is wounded but survives, and he's the leader until Obama kicks him out with his Arab Spring. And so the Iran, it had a Shah who loved America until Jimmy Carter abandoned the Shah and let the Ayatollah take over Iran. Thank you, Jimmy Carter. And then Iran begins to fund Hezbollah in Lebanon. And then in Lebanon, the fundamentalist Muslims blow up our U.S. Marine barracks in 1983, killing 241 U.S. Marines. Reagan, I loved him, but his response was to withdraw American troops. And so these Muslims were like, hey, Americans are a paper tiger, right? They'll run away. Then Afghanistan was fighting the Soviets. It was a proxy war. And so America was arming and training the Taliban to fight the Soviet Union. It was called Operation Cyclone. It was the biggest covert CIA operation, and there's Reagan meeting with the Taliban leaders, right? All right, because they're fighting the Soviets. And Tom Hanks did a movie on it called Charlie Wilson's War, and Sylvester Stallone did a movie on it called Rambo 3. And what was one of the Taliban people that we trained? Osama bin Laden. And then, now that the Iran is ruled by the fundamentalist Ayatollah, and we don't want the Ayatollah to win, so we are arming and training Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis to fight Iran. Right? And so there's Rumsfeld meeting with Saddam Hussein, and we're like behind him. It was Operation Praying Mantis, and the Iranian half of their navy was destroyed. And so it works until you get George H.W. Bush and his New World Order stuff, and all of a sudden we flip, and Saddam's the enemy. And then you have Clinton, and he is fooling around with Lewinsky and fires a couple missiles, and there's a movie called Wag the Dog, Dustin Hoffman and Robert De Niro, and it's like, oh, a president's running for re-election involved in a sexual scandal, and get a Hollywood producer to create a fake war so that it can get public attention away for it, but it is a real war, and it's called Operation Deliberate Force. And so Clinton is funneling arms through Iran to the Bosnian Muslims to fight the Serbian Christians. And when the Bosnians win, they actually name a street in Kosovo after Bill Clinton. It has a statue there and everything. And then George W. wants to totally get rid of Saddam. And here is David Kilcullen, former chief strategist, State Department, says there undeniably would be no ISIS if we had not invaded Iraq. So anybody that studies war history, if it's a hierarchical country, you get rid of the king and you put in your replacement. And you keep the structure of the country in place. Remember when you get a king, Josiah dies, and his oldest son, King Jehoahaz, is the king for 6 months until Egypt comes, gets rid of him, and puts in his brother, King Jehoiakim. And then when he dies, there's Jehoiakim, and then they come and Babylon takes Jehoiakim and puts in King Zedekiah and says, okay, you pay tribute. Right? So if the hierarchy, you just replace the leader. But what we did in Iraq was destroy the entire infrastructure of the country. It ended up being ruled by gangs called ISIS. And so, anyway, so here you have Taliban leaders, Guantanamo Bay, but Obama lets them go. John Kerry, ISIS committing genocide in Syria and Iraq. All these Christian minorities are being wiped out. Obama's bloodiest scandal reemerges. You got this, we're giving guns to the bad guys. Los Angeles Times in Syria, militias armed by the Pentagon, fight those armed by the CIA. And then we find out that Hillary Clinton is wanting to get guns from Libya over to Syria. And then it's called Benghazi. And so Tulsi Gabbard introduces a bill called Stop Arming Terrorists. Dr. Rand Paul introduces the Tulsi Gabbard Stop Arming Terrorists Act. We're giving guns over there, right, to everybody. And then President Trump, when he first got in, ends covert plan to arm Syrian rebels. And so then Trump recognizes Jerusalem as the capital. And then Biden decides, after 20 years of U.S. troops dying in Afghanistan, giving them their freedom, Biden lets them all of it for nothing. And lets them have billions of dollars worth of arms that are finding their way to Hezbollah, that are fighting the Jews. And there's evidence that Ukraine, a lot of those unaccounted for arms that we've sent over there have found their way to Hezbollah and Hamas that are also fighting the Jews. And here's the report. U.S. weapons from Afghanistan ended up in Palestine groups operated in the Gaza Strip. And anyway, I just thought I'd come and give you a little encouragement today. And then they're coming into South America and Central America and infiltrating drug gangs. And so they're coming up and crossing over our southern borders. And they got, Korans and prayer rugs coming across. Now, there's Israel. 9 million people surrounded by 400 million Muslims. Now, lots of those Muslims would just be happy to live their lives. But when the West shows itself weak and the fundamentalist ones show themselves strong, the moderate Muslims are being pressured. It'd be like a gang leader moving into your neighborhood, and if you call the police and the police don't show up, and the gang leader finds out about it and threatens you, you're not going to call the police anymore. And so, anyway, so then they decide to attack Israel on October 7th, and then in April 13th, Iran's firing more missiles. And but in closing, in 1985, Hassan Youssef was one of the founders of Hamas, and his son, Mossab Hassan Youssef, becomes a Christian. And I met him and I interviewed him on a radio show. And so he grew up in Palestine and he saw how ruthlessly Hamas terrorized civilians. He had friends that Hamas thought was working with the Jews, and he saw his friends tortured to death. And he says, I know them, they're my friends. They weren't working with the Jews. And he says, if this is the way Hamas is treating its own people, and they're not completely in control, imagine how bad they would be if they were in complete control. And so, from 1997 to 2007, Youssef secretly warns Israelis of impending suicide attacks to save their lives. And after 10 years, he eventually became a Christian and escaped to America. And he did a CBN interview, May 22nd, 2010. My problem is with the God of the Quran. If we compare his personality to the God of the Bible, we will find the difference. From their fruits, we know them. The fruits of the God of the Quran is terrorism, beating women, killing children. My transformation took 6 years of study. It was not overnight. I had to study Christianity and other religions. I considered at some point not to believe in any religion. The only path I found, peace, which was good for me and good for all mankind, was Jesus Christ. You know, I know I'm out of time, right? But I wanted to throw in one last thought, and it's why did God make us? And in 2003, they focused the Hubble telescope on a spot in the sky where there was nothing. Tiny spot, size of a grain of sand held between your fingers at arm's length and against the night sky. Tiny spot, nothing there. After 11 days, they developed the images. In that spot was 10,000 galaxies with hundreds of billions of stars in each galaxy. And this is a picture. It's the Hubble Ultra Deep Space Field. It's not an artist's rendition. This is the furthest picture ever taken away from planet Earth, and every dot you see is a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars. And now with the James Webb telescope they launched a couple years ago, you can see the red shift. And light travels in waves, blue being the shortest wave, red the longest. The red shift means you're watching these galaxies moving away from us. They now estimate the observable universe is 93 billion light years across and still expanding at the speed of light. And the largest star they found is Stephenson 2-18. It's a super gas giant. It's so large, if you were to place it in our solar system, it would engulf the orbit of Saturn, the sixth planet from the sun. We're the third planet from the sun. Could you imagine one single star that enormous, and God made it all, and he made you? Why would he make you? What could you possibly offer a being that is that powerful? Nothing, except maybe something. What's a galaxy anyway? It's a bunch of rocks. Hot rocks, cold rocks, vaporized rocks. A rock cannot love you. So it's almost like at some time in eternity past, God said to himself, been there, done that, I can make everything. I would really like someone in my image that could love me. Now it gets interesting because love by definition must be voluntary. The moment it's forced, it evaporates. So in the context of everything God controls, time, matter, space, energy, he intentionally created one tiny thing he does not control, your will. Now, he could control it if he wanted to, but that would defeat the very reason he made us different than everything else. And he doesn't need your love. He's not incomplete, and your love somehow completes him. He doesn't need your love, but he wants it. Parents don't need the love of their children, but they want it. And the more you love somebody, the more you want that somebody to love you back. God loves you infinitely. He has an infinite desire for you to love him back, but he'll never force you. Because the moment he would force you, he himself would know he's forcing you, and he would know your response is not a love response. So he'll never force you. You know, what's the most important thing in your life? Well, somewhere near the top of the list, it's loving and being loved. If you're made in God's image, could it be that loving and being loved is a big deal to God? Now, God loves everything he created, but the question is, could what he created love him back? Galaxies can't love, rocks can't love, animals follow instinct. I looked at the word angel. It appears 289 times in the Bible. Not one time is the word love used to describe an angel's relationship with God. They worship God, they praise God, they glorify God. The word angel means messenger. They deliver God's messages, they deliver God's judgments. They sang when the stars were created. They rejoice when a sinner converts. Jesus says, I'll confess you before the angels. They're mighty beings. They're powerful beings. But they're not made in God's image. And Jesus did not die on the cross for angels. They were made for a purpose. What purpose were you made for? We're not strong and we're not very smart. You know, a king can have a castle with really powerful soldiers and then he can have children. Guess what? The word love is used all throughout the Bible to describe men and women's relationship with God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Jesus rose from the dead and said, Peter, do you love me? We are beings uniquely created with the ability to love God back. But for love to be loved, it must be voluntary. He'll never force it. You know, I was thinking, how can God give us free will to love him back and him still be in control of everything? God created time, right? So if you read it, God created light. Light is a photon, which is a perpendicular wave in the electromagnetic field that travels at 186,000 miles per second. And Einstein's theory of relativity is the closer you can travel approaching the speed of light, for you, time slows down. And if you could travel the speed of light, for you, time would stand still. God created light. He's faster than light. So for God, time stands still. We'll never comprehend that. But there's a verse that says, a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years. Imagine experiencing one day as if it was 1,000 years. I mean, in other words, we're living in slow motion compared to God. God exists in the ever-present now. I am that I am. And when you're in his presence, you cannot think about the past. You cannot think about the future. You can't even think. You just experience, I'm in the presence of all love, all power, all judgment, all at once. It'd be overwhelming. So for God to create our reality, he had to take now and stretch it out and slow it down, right? So it's like, I was trying to think of a way of explaining it. It's our limited free will in the context of his unlimited sovereign will. And it works because he's outside of time. Imagine you have a GPS on your phone, you make a wrong turn, it recalculates. And the guy in the car next to him is making a wrong turn and his is recalculating at the same time. Maybe everybody in the city's making wrong turns and it's all, maybe everybody in the whole country is making wrong turns in the world. In other words, we make good decisions, we make bad decisions. God's outside of time. He can readjust every electron before he lets time move forward to the next nanoframe. Time's moving because God said, I'm the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. So it's moving, but he's outside of it in a dimension that we can't understand. But we make our little free will decisions, but we're moving so slow, he can readjust all the variables. And we sort of know that God's outside of time because if you're somewhere with somebody and you say, this is no coincidence, this is a God-ordained moment, this is providential, and you feel the goosebumps of the presence of the Lord, that God orchestrated this moment for you to be with him. And then, and the last thing is God's just, which means he has to judge every sin. And so that's where Jesus comes in. So God is just in that he judges every sin, but he's love in that he provided the lamb to take the judgment for the sin. So I'll end with that. God bless you.